What do I say? Start the meeting? Oh, to order. Yeah. Hello. I would like to call the meeting of April 3rd, 2017 to order, please. And if we could have the roll call.
Mr. Spring.
Here.
Mr. Sporhays.
Here.
Mr. Spinelli.
Here.
Ms. Bailey. Here. Mr. Strike.
Here.
Mr. Looney.
Here.
Mr. Walker and Ms. Barker have been excused, and Mr. Robinson will be late. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we have a quorum, and we're in fine shape. If I could have a motion to approve the minutes, 3 sets of minutes, February 13th, March 6th, and March 13th. Somebody move? Okay, we got Ms. Bailey moved it, and Mr. Looney seconded it. All in favor? Should we just go voice? Is that what we do? Voice? No objections. Approve the minutes. Disclosures, please. Ms. Bailey?
None.
Mr. Looney?
None.
Mr. Strike?
Yes, in the matter of case 2017012, related case 0021, I was not present, so will not be voting.
Excellent. Okay, that's good. Mr. Spinelli?
Yeah, in the matter of case 2017-0030 on the consent agenda, I was not present for that case.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sporhays?
Thank you. And also in the matter of case 2017-0030, I was absent and will not be voting on that case.
Okay, I have no disclosures myself. Let's see. I think there's a reordering of the agenda that's necessary. If I could have a motion, Mr. Strike, seconded by Mr. Sporhays.
Yes, let's begin with on case G1, case 2017-0028. Move to postpone this case indefinitely.
Me. I believe that's G2 that you need to postpone indefinitely.
I believe you are correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Excuse me. I will move that to 2017-0001. Move to postpone that indefinitely.
Okay. If there's no objections, that is, motion is approved. Any other reorders, please?
Yes, another one in 2016-0127, identified as E1. Move to reorder this to the end of tonight's agenda.
Okay, Mr. Strike moved and Mrs. Voorhees seconded it. Any objections to that? Okay, for the audience sake, we did that in order to move the public hearings, which I'm assuming some of you are here for, ahead of the order, so you can get out earlier. Hang on a second. Okay. We don't have enough persons who were at the meetings involving the resolutions, so we will need to make a motion to postpone those. To the end of the meeting. Oh, I see. Tyler's going to be here, so just move it to the end of the meeting, please.
And I would so move to move resolution 2017-007, and let's move them both then. 2017-012, both.
Okay, moved by Mr. Strike and seconded by Ms. Bailey. No objections. The motion is approved. All right. Looks like we are. Next case would be F4, which is unfinished business. Does not require a public hearing. It's a time extension for minor conditional use amendments. This is the second time for this extension of a natural resource extraction, I believe, petitioned by Klutna, Inc. Does staff have any information for the Commission?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. None of the reviewing agencies objected to the granting of this second 5-year time extension for a natural resource extraction for a site commonly known as Eklutna Site 4. No complaints have been reported from the public. The current conditions are substantially the same as what existed when it was originally approved. The department is recommending approval of this 5-year time extension.
All right, any questions to staff? It looks like Mr. Strike has a question.
Yes, my question to the staff is, back in 2007, it would appear, when this was first approved, there were a number of conditions imposed on the permit. Have all of those been satisfied?
Yes, they have.
Have the annual reports each December been submitted?
Yes, they have.
Okay. And I believe there was a water quality plan that was required?
The water quality reports have also been submitted.
That's been submitted as well. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Does the petitioner have any comments or something to say? What you think is fine? Okay. Looks pretty straightforward. All right. If there's no additional discussion, okay, Mr. Strike.
And as I reviewed this, we've had other cases come before us involving the same area, the same road, and the concerns regarding the maintenance and upkeep and so forth on the road. But I do notice that back in 2007, there was a specific provided transportation operation management plan, specifically addressing the amount of vehicular or truck traffic that would be going through. But as I recall, when we last took up a case in the same area, no such plan seemed to exist because it was never referenced. And it would have seemed like that plan would have been referenced as it deals with the same road. So just to clarify, there is a transportation operation management plan identifying the traffic load identified?
Yes, there is. The conditions of approval for the original conditional use were all approved. I think that, Mr. Strike, the subsequent case on a different property, I think that part of the synergy of the two projects were that they were going to use the same trucks and do it in a circular fashion. But that wasn't a case that I reviewed, so I don't, I'm not an expert in that case further to the north adjoining this one, but I think that they were trying to use some of the same truck trips so that it wasn't duplicative.
And that was going to be my next question, was to, instead of having two plans identifying the two separate areas, that there should be a single consolidated plan encompassing the whole of the project, so we have a totality of the vehicular traffic, not taken into isolation based on any one segment of the property.
Yeah, I mean, I think a few months ago the commission reviewed this adjoining project, and that there was a conditional approval, or the traffic was reviewed at the time, and the commission approved it. You know, assuming that the two projects, that the road was adequate to support the two projects and the number of truck trips. I know that the planner must have taken into account this Eklutna Site 4 project when reviewing the truck trips for the second project. I'm in a little bit of a deficit on answering the question, because all I can say for certain is that the project before you is all copacetic. You know.
Okay, so perhaps they can address that when they. Is the petitioner going to address?
Well,
come before
this is a simple 5-year time extension that you know, historically has just been handled without a discussion.
That's fine. Thank you.
If the petitioner representative wouldn't mind, could you address that, please?
Hi, I'm Michelle Ritter with Dow. Just to speak to the traffic totality part of the condition. So to go back to the first question, there has been a traffic circulation plan as part of Site 4. And kind of to speak to what you guys already mentioned, it was agreed that we wouldn't be duplicative in the conditions of approval. But one of the conditions of approval in Track 37, which is the property to the north that you're talking about, is that we have to have complete a limited traffic impact analysis that needs to be approved by DOT, and that's going to take consideration to the traffic coming to both Site 4 and to Track 37. So any concerns would be addressed through that with DOT as well. You're welcome.
Any other questions, Commission? Then I would entertain a motion, please. Yes, Ms. Bailey, and
In the matter of case 2017-0031, move to extend the previously approved conditional use permit for the natural resource extraction for an additional, I believe it was 5-year extension to January 31st, 2022.
the motion's been seconded by Mr. Strike. Any discussion?
I'd just like to add that all the conditions were previously satisfied and that there were no agency or public objections or complaints.
And I would add, I appreciate the work that Eklutna has done and their representative has done in putting this together. And this has been a ongoing development in the area, and by combining the areas and being more efficient that way, appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's vote on that. And that motion has been approved. All right, the next case is a public hearing, case number 2017-0028, request to rezone a parcel of land from B3SL to PLI-SL. For the audience's information, a public hearing, public is invited to speak at these public hearings. After the staff presentation is completed, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established by the Commission rules of procedure. Petitioners and or their representatives will have 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives or groups, for example, community councils, PTAs, etc., will have 5 minutes to speak, and individuals will have 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. All right, then, if staff, please give a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Providence Health Services is requesting to rezone this property of approximately 7 acres from B3SL General Business District with special limitations to PLI Public Lands and Institutions District. This rezoning would allow for the continued use of the parcel as an outdoor storage yard until funding is available for a new administrative building, which is not anticipated for at least 10 years. The Planning and Zoning Commission may recommend approval, and the Assembly may approve a rezoning only if it meets all the standards required in AMC 2103-160E. There are 9 standards. I'll go through each of the standards separately. Standard number 1, staff finds that this standard is met. The rezoning to PLI will allow for the development that is consistent with the UMED district plan. This property is identified in the UMED district plan as major institutional. This land use designation is intended for university, medical centers, and social service providers that serve a wide area in the community, region, or state, and collectively function as a major activity and employment center. Standard number 2, staff finds that this standard is met. The site is identified in the 2001 Anchorage 2020 Land Use Policy Map as a redevelopment mixed-use area. Relevant policies in the 2020 are Policy 4, 5, and 7. Standard number 3, Staff finds that this standard is met. The intent of this rezone to PLI is to allow for uses that are more supportive of the University of Alaska and Anchorage campus. This rezone would allow for a major public, quasi-public, civic, administrative, and institutional uses. Standard number 4, staff finds that this standard is met. The general area contains a mix of commercial, office, and institutional uses. The surrounding uses include UAA campus to the north, the McLaughlin Youth Center to the east, the Orthopedic Physicians of Anchorage Medical Office to the south, and commercial development and vacant lots to the west, and residential lots to the northwest. The proposed zoning is consistent and compatible with those uses. Standard number 5, staff finds that this standard is met. Petition site is located within the Anchorage Roads and Drainage Service Area, also known as ARTSA, and has access to Laurel Street and East 38th Avenue. Public utilities such as water, sewer, gas, and electric are also available to this property. Standard number 6, staff finds that this standard is met. The rezoning of the site is not anticipated to have any significant impacts to air, water, noise, stormwater management, wildlife, or vegetation. And future uses of the property, as permitted by the PLI district, will have no negative impact on the natural environment. Standard number 7, staff finds that this standard is met. No negative impacts are anticipated on surrounding properties from future development of the petition site. The site abuts Lake Otis Parkway to the west, Laurel Street to the east, East 38th Avenue to the south, and Providence Drive to the north. Standard number 8, staff finds this standard is met. The rezoning to PLI is consistent with the surrounding land use patterns, which are institutional and commercial. And standard number 9, staff finds that this standard is met. The rezoning will not create a split zone lot. The proposed rezoning to PLI meets the approval criteria for zoning map amendments. The zoning is consistent with the UMED plan adopted by the Assembly in 2016, which identifies this property as major institutional, and as such, staff would recommend that the property be rezoned from B3SL to PLI, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that the Commission may have. Thank you.
I believe Mr. Strike has a question for staff.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. Does the current zoning allow an administrative type building that might be put in place in 10 years?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, yes, the current zoning under B3SL would allow for an administrative building. I think what the applicants are looking to do is, until such time as an administrative building is constructed, keep the existing use of the property as an outdoor storage in conjunction with that community use, the campus.
But that use is also permitted under the current zoning with the limitation, when they came forth before this body approximately 5 years ago, that approval was granted as well as a conditional use, was it not?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, no, that use would not be permitted under the B3SL zoning. And to kind of further on that point, you'll be seeing here in the next few months an application coming forward to allow the storage yard to continue in operation under a major site plan review.
But in 2013, that use was provided for.
Currently, they have a temporary permit to operate the storage yard. So they will be coming forward to remove that temporary status on the storage yard and allow it by right in conjunction with that
as a PL1.
Community use, as PLI, correct.
PLI. So what this resolution is really, cutting down to the chase, is really removing the special restrictions that were placed on the property back in 2003.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, I don't believe so. I believe that they are looking to rezone the entire property because under the B3, a storage yard would not be permitted in the fashion that they are operating it currently. If the Commission remembers, months back, we took an ordinance to you that allowed for storage in conjunction with community uses. The Commission recommended approval to the Assembly on that ordinance, and it was ultimately approved. The petitioners are coming forward to rezone the property to PLI because a storage yard is not permitted by right in the B3 district in conjunction with a community use. In the PLI, however it is.
But by default, we are removing the special limitations that were placed on the property in 2003, which had to do with how parking and the facing of the building. It was a mixed use. The intent was to develop this property as mixed use. It talked about how the buildings would be situated, that the parking would not be visible to ideally Lake Otis and or Providence, and it was to be in the back. So there was a number of limitations placed. All these limitations then go away as a result of this rezoning?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, yes. The limitations were placed on the property because when you rezone from PLI to B3, it's essentially an upzoning. And so there was additional limitations placed on the property to ensure that the public's, so the public wouldn't be harmed in development of the property. This application is essentially reverting back to the underlying zoning that was there in 2003 when they rezoned to B3. So it's essentially a reversion to zoning, for lack of a better word.
Well, they rezoned to develop the property, and there was a buyer, and it wasn't the university that owned the property necessarily before that. It was a land trust, I believe. And so this was intended then to be developed in that realm. Now it's reverting back into a PLI, but we're losing some of the special limitations and or restrictions that the public was after back in 2003. I live a short distance away from the property, drive by this every day, and that was one of the concerns. And they've done a great job in keeping the trees high, so you don't even see this storage yard area back there. But that was one of the concerns from the businesses, is how this would look and appeal, and what the presentation of the University UMed district coming in on 36 was going to look like. So my concern is that all of that work in 2003 goes away, and it's carte blanche, and they can do whatever they want and put a large administrative building with a large parking lot out in the front, which was never the intent back in 2003. That's what we were trying to avoid.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, I completely see your point. I can tell you that it appears in my research that the rezoning from from PLI to B3 was considered an upzoning, and they wanted further limitations placed on the property to ensure that the public wouldn't be harmed. This is a reversion back to that PLI. Staff feels that no additional limitations need to be placed in the property, assuming they can develop the property in conformance with the PLI district. If the commission sees differently, then they can certainly impose additional limitations on the property, or recommend, I should say, additional limitations.
Any other questions, staff? I guess I have one. This is owned by the UAA? It is true.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, yes, it is owned by UAA.
I saw a reference to Providence, and I wasn't sure what that meant, but. Oh, that's Providence Drive, okay. Sorry, okay. And so, if it's owned by UA, they have a master plan?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I believe they have an internal master plan. I don't think they have a plan that's been approved by the commission, no. You might pose that question to them, though.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions, I would like to invite the petitioner's representative to come speak.
Hi, my name is Michelle Ritter. I'm with Dow. With me this evening is Chris Terlettis, John Hansen, and Kim Mahoney, all with the University of Alaska, Anchorage. So as was discussed, the site was previously zoned PLI. It went into private ownership. They had a more mixed-use development idea for the property, so they rezoned it to B3. Special limitations were placed on the B3 district to, one, make it more in line with the PLI district, and also to have certain design criteria. I'd like to just point out that that was also prior to the adoption of the UMed district plan, which actually has its own set of design standards. So when we say that if we remove these special limitations, that there's just carte blanche, they can build whatever they want, I'd like to clarify that they will still be subject to the design standards of the UMed district, which speak to form and placement. I'd also like to add that under the PLI zoning designation, any administrative building, pretty much anything the university wants to do, it's going to be required to have a major site plan review. So prior to them developing that admin building, they'll be before this body to have a review. So parking can also be addressed at that time. UAA bought the property 6 years ago, and they wanted to rezone it back to PLI 1 so that the outdoor storage could become a permitted use. If it's not able to be retained there, then they will either have to clear another area on the campus to have that. I mean, they have to have their ability to have facilities maintenance, or it will go into the parking area. Because this site had, if you remember back to when it was approved under the site plan for the temporary use, there was almost about $1 million of work that had to be done into developing that site because of basically erroneous flood mapping. So because of the amount of revenue that's already put into that, because it's working very fine and it's alleviating parking with the rest of the campus, that's why they really want it there for the short term until there is funding available for a gateway building. They do have a master plan that's approved by their Board of Regents, and it does address that spot as kind of a gateway building. And this is in line with both the 2020 plan, the proposed land use plan map of the 2040, as well as the UMed district plan. We do meet all of the 9 standards for approving a rezone. And we also attended the University Area Community Council on November 2nd to discuss the rezone, and specifically that the short term, 10 years, I guess, in the life of a campus, 10 years is short term, but that in the interim, before there's an administrative building, it would be used as this outdoor storage. And they passed a resolution of non-objection, which you can find on page 69 of your staff report. So with that, I'd like to save the rest of my time for rebuttal and answer any questions you have.
Good evening. Chris Terlides, the Facilities Director for UAA. Thanks for hearing us tonight. Michelle laid out the case and staff laid out the case pretty well. I guess I'd like to add, we bought this property 6 years ago. It's adjacent to the campus, and all of the Anchorage campus in Midtown is PLI property. So with that rationale, the adjacent property, which we bought to be part of campus, is also PLI. Allows us to use it the same way that we use the rest of campus. So really, that's the long and short of the rationale. And again, we've gone to the community council. We've met the special permit requirements, and now we're just trying to get this property to look just like the rest of campus. Thank you.
Okay. You have approximately 6 minutes of rebuttal time if you need it. Questions?
This was this question back to, couldn't this body just extend the original, I call it the conditional use special limitation? The one that's in place expired in July of 2016?
No, you could not. So that was done under old Title 21. It was not a conditional use permit. It was required to come here for a site plan review because of a special limitation on the existing zoning that says prior to any fill permit, any building permit, which includes fill permits, a site plan review had to be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's why you saw that. Otherwise, it would have just been approved with a letter as a temporary use. That mechanism to approve that does not exist under new Title 21. Let me clarify, it does exist, but it has a one-time 6-month temporary use approval with a one-time extension. So literally, 12 months, and then after that you can't extend it. So as new code currently sits, you cannot extend that use.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, public may testify at this time. Anybody wants to testify on this case? Rebuttal may not be necessary, I guess. There's nothing to rebut. Okay. All right. That concludes the public hearing portion. Anyone would like to make a motion or on this case, please? All right, Mr. Looney.
I'll give this a try. So in the case of 2017-0028, to rezone the 7 acres from B3SL to PLI, I move that we approve the motion based, I guess we'll talk about the condition later on, that's right. Okay.
That's fine. Yes, Mr. Strike seconded it. Discussion, please.
Essentially, I guess I find that the rezone meets the criteria for approval, including the 9 standards that are documented in the staff packet, and that's why I approve the motion.
Yes, Ms. Bailey.
I'd also like to note that it's consistent with the UMed district plan and that there was no objection by the community council.
Okay, that should be sufficient, I think. Let's vote on the motion, please. That motion's been approved. I'd like to, for the record, I'd like to state that the chair, Mr. Robinson's here, so he'll be taking over the meeting from now on.
So I think it's of course, the whole area is one separate zone, so they do the big master plan. And I guess we'll have to
You should sign out.
We moved the consent agenda to the end because you were here.
yeah, special invitation.
You want to move it now?
We already moved it.
Is at the end, after the land use plan map?
I think, yeah, no. Yeah, I wonder.
Can we find out
Here's the one-
if anyone
they
is
want to-
here
They want to all be green.
for consent agenda items?
Would I use?
No, I mean, is it? Can I ask, is anyone in the audience here for the consent agenda that we had moved to the back of the agenda? Any of the resolutions? No, so we can keep it where it is. Terry, are you escaping? Are you escaping? Okay, you sticking around for the land use plan map? No?
So
He's leaving now.
Yes, we should make some comments about it. So great. You know the lyrics.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, before he goes. Yeah, by the way. This is literally bon voyage to Mr. Schoenthal. Terry, before you go, I just want to personally say thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge of Anchorage and the private sector with us. I think it's really helpful to have that perspective, and I just wanted to share one little story. I remember when I was kind of a young-ish planner, and I remember struggling through some issues with Terry, and Terry was telling me the war stories around 4th Avenue, and having worked on projects. Am I remembering this correctly? And sort of this notion that, as a newcomer to Anchorage 12 years ago, seeing 4th Avenue as a two-way street with wide sidewalks, to me this seemed so common sense. And Terry schooled me on how it wasn't always like that, how in fact it was controversial to get it to the point of where it is today. And I think it was a very good lesson, to me anyway, on the importance of incrementalism, the importance of kind of making these steps as you go, and it sort of grounded me as a planner at that time, so I appreciate that. And I won't share with everybody where you're headed, but you're basically sailing off to the seven seas, and you've a well-deserved retirement. Don't totally forget about us here in Anchorage.
To the chair, I certainly won't, and it's been a privilege to me to work with all of you for the past year. The Anchorage is well served by the volunteer service that you all bring to this commission every month. So all I can say is keep up the good work, and thank you very much for all of the effort you do.
Thanks. I'm shocked that you're not sticking around for the full meeting. So. All right, so thank you for moving forward with me not there. So we are on the land use plan map issue, is that right? This is, that's correct. And then with the consent agenda still to follow. So in front of us is there it is, 2016-127, review and recommendation for the land use plan map. Can I get a motion to move into committee of the whole? Is that where you were going, Brendan? A motion to move into the committee of the whole, seconded by Ms. Bailey. An objection? We are now into the committee of the whole. While I get organized here, I'm going to ask maybe Tom Davis or staff what your hope is for us here this evening, and kind of get us oriented on what we should have in front of us. And I cannot find my cover sheet. I'm going to use this one right here. So the list of the issues. Oh my gosh, it looks like we're pulling them all anyway, right? So, but Tom, you got any? Clearly, your intent is for us to get through the issues that are marked in green in the packet, right?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be about the 10th meeting at which the Commission has been reviewing issue items, and one of the last. And this is another 27 issues. And we, again, are presenting them in a batch here. The underlined ones, the underlined ones in your memo, the staff determined seem to be merit Commission deliberation individually. Maybe there was a lot of public comment, or the commissioners had concerns about the issue. The remainder, the Commission can, we believe, approve as a batch in the committee of a whole deliberations, unless commissioners individually want to pull an item individually. So the non-underlined ones you can approve, we believe, as a batch. There are approximately 50 that remain. We are doing everything we can to get those to you this week. Next week, April 10, then potentially quite a few issues to go over. And we will be providing that as quickly as possible this week. There may be up to 10 items that we can't get to of those 50. And we hope that will be relatively light duty for the meeting that you have planned in the first week of May to come back and review the land use plan map. But we are working as hard as we can to get as many of those 50 to you. Also tonight, the Commission has a hard copy of the issue response maps for tonight. If I could ask Mr. Cecil to hold up that. Could you take the cover? Show them. It's the commission. Yeah, that's it. The commissioners received that by email, and I believe was that 2 Fridays ago, and we've just passed that out in hard copy to you tonight, and those correspond to some of the issues that we'll go over tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for staff, either on schedule or anything else before we start going through the items? Okay. Moving on to 1I addendum. It's recommended. It was in the supplemental. Thanks. 1I addendum, it was recommended by staff to take that up. Is there a commissioner that would like to pull that item?
Hang on a second, please. No.
1I on anybody.
That was one of the batch. Was it?
1I basically is dealing with how to, the conflict between the land use plan and individual sub-area plans and district plans. Anyone else? So is there anything burning that staff, I don't think we have any issue, which I will take to mean consent. Is that to be interpreted as consent to the staff recommendation? I'm seeing nods. Nods. So is there anything else? If we say yes, is there anything else you feel like you need to add, Mr. Davis? Otherwise, we're good with it.
No, thank you.
Okay, consider that a yes. Next item is 1M. Relationship of plan to zoning. Any issue here? I had a clarifying issue. Say there's an area, just how this will be implemented. Say there's an area that's indicated for a change, and it's a larger area, and it's also an area that somehow is not deemed to be appropriate for an area-wide rezoning. Do you not create issues where people come in with smaller chunks and sort of bit by bit rezone that area, even though there's consistency with the land use plan? You could argue that there's inconsistency with the existing land use. It's sort of the bit by bit approach that I'm most struggling with, that I think the general public will most struggle with, where we're going to look to the plan. The plan's going to say that it's the appropriate designation long term, but next door, for example, might be what it used to be, right? Is there guidance as to how you would have us walk through that, and is there any narrative that you would, you can contemplate in that sort of what I wrote down bit by bit scenario?
One of the big issues remaining to come for the commission is issue 8B, and is the issue of implementation rezonings. We got a fair amount of comment from the chamber, from within our own agencies, from the development community, that there needs to be a more aggressive and systematic way of implementing the plan, where the plan is showing different land uses from what are zoned, allowed in each area today. We've spent a lot of time determining where those areas are and what the potential is to address those as targeted area rezonings, where the municipality would facilitate the rezonings, and also other strategies to incentivize or assist with rezonings of areas. This is a long-range plan, and so it shows areas being used in a different way from today, as typical in the long-range land use plan. So while the public hearing draft has an action plan, we're still working on parts of that implementation plan, and we don't have a narrative in the draft plan for dealing with bit-by-bit rezonings.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Any issues to staff's suggested language? Is there agreement with staff's suggested language on issue 1M? Or any objection on language of 1M? Okay, hearing none. 2I. Some new language on item, this is on page 43 of your packet. Commercial and Main Street corridor policies and actions. Some wordsmithing. Any objection to staff's suggested language? Any objection or clarification needed? Going once, twice. Okay, moving on. 3B, addendum number 2. Go ahead, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, this fairly controversial issue, and there's a lot of disagreement, I think, among some quarters about it appears from the comment anyway, about the forecast for airport traffic. And I know that this was done, the master plan was done several years ago, right? Approved. Seems to me that there's probably going to be an update to that forecast sometime in the future, given the fact that we're now in a recession. And at least part of the traffic involves people who live here that travel outside, and the growth in population would increase the number of airline flights in and out of the international airport. So I guess my concern is, how do we know that this is still valid? This need is for this runway is still valid, and are we putting this in, and we're going to change our minds, in the future, given what if there's a new forecast? How do we deal with that? Changes in forecast. Do we keep, do we take it out, or do we put it back in when it's, how do we deal with that?
Well, through the chair, you're talking to a guy who's been chasing forecasts around quite a bit for the last few years. What I understand about the airport's forecast as opposed to the one we're having to deal with for this land use plan map is, like you say, there is the local traffic involved. I'm not an expert in to what degree that the anticipated traffic is outside of our local economy, but my understanding is that that forecast is to a much greater degree influenced by the outside global economy and the outside transportation industry than a forecast of traffic that's simply based on the local economy. So to a much greater degree than the forecasts we use in land use planning locally, including the one we use for this plan, I think that the forecast by the airport is much more determined by factors beyond the local economy. But that being said, the local or the global economy could also change for the worse. Transportation technology could change in ways we don't predict. These forecasts that we use in the planning are projections. They're not predictions. And they are intended to provide you, the decision maker, with a likely range of scenarios for which to plan. For the airport, as well as for the municipality, one of the greatest policy risks is not planning for needs to underplan. For us, it's finding enough land for housing. For the airport, it's dealing with what their forecast sees as in the future, the airport will not be able to accommodate traffic. They don't know when that's going to be, but they see it coming. And the problem for them and for the planning in the future is that they they'll need to be doing the land planning many, many years before the runway is actually needed. So if it's not needed till 2050, things need to be happening, 12, 15 years before 2050 or before 2040. And I have no way to predict when that will be needed. But like us, they're depending on forecasts, projections.
So just if you could, so the staff recommendation is no change. How is that communicated on the map itself?
Well, this item, issue 3B, addendum number 2, is the reason why we brought it forward was we wanted to make sure that the arguments and points addressed by the Parks Commission were brought to your attention. And the Parks Commission reviewed this land use plan map separately. They did not have the benefit of reviewing the issue response and the Planning and Zoning Commission's work on item 3B. But they did take up these arguments regarding the likelihood of the forecast, the impacts to the AWU, and we wanted to make sure that those arguments came to your attention and that you saw the response from staff. The main work on issue 3B and the changes to the land use plan map, the changes to the designations, the multiple changes to the content of the plan's text are all addressed in issue 3B and 3B supplement above. They've already been addressed. So basically that there have been in and around the airport lands, those lands that and the airport that we see as today being used as open space and recreation, we intend to show in one pattern and the areas potentially impacted by this second runway, including Point Warrenzoff Park, parts of AWU lands. Those will be showed in another pattern. All that is laid out in issue 3B. Thank you.
Mr. Spring, anything else?
Sorry, no.
Any other issues or questions for staff? Hearing none, that is concurrence with staff recommendation. 4A addendum. Page 72. Mr. Spring.
Yeah, this seems to be an issue commented on by DOT regarding capacity of the transportation system to handle the changes in the land use map that they're proposing. And I just don't, I just wanted to comment that I don't see where they're going to achieve much additional collector connections along Gamble or Ingra or even along Tudor between Lake Otis and Elmore. That's what seems to be what they're saying. There needs to be more connections, but there's a pretty good grid system there along Tudor, and then there's a great grid system along Gamble and Ingra. So I don't understand what they're getting at there with their comments. And I don't disagree with your staff recommendation. I just wanted to comment on that. That I don't see the issue. I don't understand what their issue is here. But no response necessary for that.
Any other comments or questions for staff? My comment is I've seen lots of situations where we look at kind of road issues as singular road issues, and when we have a DOT road and muni roads kind of coming together, there strikes me that in practice there isn't as much coordination, where you have this statement, others will identify study areas for transportation and infrastructure improvements, such as secondary street and sidewalk connections that are needed to support planned growth in an area. I kind of wanted to somehow say, you know, to me the issue is, in particular, where changes to the overall network, not just one MOA or DOT street, are needed. I mean, it just feels like it's kind of this cross-jurisdictional need where we're not talking about changes to Tudor, we're talking about some of the feeder streets, smaller enhancements, if you will. So I don't know if that sort of language gets to it. I see it, for example, in Spenard, where we've done work where I think there's a real need to have the Muni and the state sit down and do some level of planning that doesn't seem to be happening commonly. And I don't, you know, it's at a more smaller network. It's not the big network, nor is it the whole corridor. It's like a, you know, a neighborhood that can't solely be shouldered by one TIA or one project. It still is bigger than one project, but it's not as big as the whole system. So that was a suggestion I had. I don't know. I'd that be open if you don't think it's helpful. So adding on to your first sentence there, in particular, where changes to the overall network are needed, or something to that effect. Again, trying to signify that it's not just one street. If you tell me it doesn't matter, then I drop it. I'm just trying to help a situation that I see as a problem.
No, that's a helpful perspective, and we could go off and try to take that language and bring it back at the end of the Commission's deliberations on the plan.
Okay. Anyone else have an objection to that clarification? Seems minor, but it's trying to highlight an area that I think is a problem. Any other issues? Did you respond to this street tree landscaping issue that the traffic engineer brought up?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we did. We slipped in to the language on page 72. Oh, bear with me here. Where are we? I'm sorry, on page 73. The very last recommended amendment under this item, amend action 6-1 on page 63, begins with develop a phasing and prioritization program. What we got out of the traffic engineer's comment was a concern that there isn't enough right-of-way to provide for the road traffic and the additional amenities that are needed. There isn't the width. So what we did was to slip in right-of-way width among the improvement types. That was our attempt at responding to the concern. It's a very generalized action, but that was one way to attempt to recognize that concern that we have with our rights of way in town. Thank you.
Thank you. Last comment I'd have, similar to what I said on the first part, item 5.3, and to John's point, I think it's not just about street connections, intersection improvements, or pedestrian connections. It's enhancements of those areas, right? It's you might not be getting a whole bunch more connections or additional right-of-way, but there is a need for those enhancements to carry the development that the plan calls for. Any other issues on item 4A, addendum? Okay, moving on to 4C. Any questions?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I have a comment on that. I'm trying to wrap my head around the comment and what they're trying to get at. It seems like they're kind of raising a red flag, saying, on one hand, that the MTP and land use plan aren't really coordinated, but then again, there's really no problem or something, but I'm not really sure what they're getting at. There's a need, though, I think, for coordination between the transportation plan, the MTP, and land use plan. And what they didn't say in here was that the transportation demand model should, in the land use allocation part of it, should eventually, sooner than later, reflect the new land use plan that once it's adopted in any case. That seems to be the way to go. That way we make sure that when the MTP is updated, they take into account the increased demand created by, potentially by the land use plan, right? It seems to me maybe a recommendation would be to add that requirement that the next revision of the MTP should reflect the updated land use classifications incorporated in the adopted land use plan, which would probably just simply require that they go back and change the densities on the vacant parcels and the redevelopable parcels to reflect what changes we're making. And I think they're pretty substantial. I mean, you've done a lot of work here, and you made a lot of great recommendations for land use changes and increases in density. If that's not reflected in the MTP, then I think we might have a problem. I think it needs to be done. It wouldn't hurt, I don't think, to have that as a requirement, as a recommendation in the plan.
I'd always just assumed that once it was adopted, they would take that, right?
Well,
You think you need something that explicitly says that? Maybe that's something for the adopting resolution, that's one of the things that we think the plan should be utilized for.
I'm just concerned that it might not be, is all.
Yeah.
It might not be done, because I know, well, full disclosure, I have worked on the transportation demand model, and particularly on the allocation part of it. The allocation, we didn't have, of course, the land use plan available, so we couldn't make that change. It may be that they're down the road on the MTP. There might be reluctance to actually do that in order to keep on schedule, but if they don't, and then they might be tempted to do that.
And when's the next update to the MTP?
When is what?
When would the next update to the MTP
They're
be?
started now.
No, I know, but after this adoption.
Oh, after this one?
Yeah, so we're going to adopt
4
the plan
years.
map,
4
then we're
years.
going to adopt an outdated MTP based on previous land use, and then what to catch up 4 years later. If you got a suggestion for that, let me know on how to remedy it.
I don't think it's a big work item.
Okay.
I think they can do it, and I like to motivate them to do it, is all. That's all. And make sure that.
Do you have an idea of what kind of language you would need to motivate?
Yes, I do. Revise the transportation demand model to include new land use plan input and land use classifications in order to determine projects needed to be included in the MTP update.
Tom?
It could be better, but I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. One place we can insert that directive is, it seems specific, it could be an additional action item in the implementation actions checklist, or were you thinking of it more at the policy level? I'm looking at the actions checklist on page 60. It's, on page 60, starting page 63 at the bottom, 64, series of transportation actions for AMATs to carry out. It could be an action.
I'd be happy with that if the rest of the commission agrees.
Seems like a no-brainer, but if we need it explicitly. So is there any support for adding an action? What Tom's referring to is the actions checklist in the back of the actual plan under the category of Anchorage coordinates transportation and land use, which sort of says it all, to provide safe, efficient, and affordable travel choices. And you would add an explicit action that would say amend to John's point. Is there support for this to become an action directing the state DOT to update their model to incorporate the land use plan assumptions?
It would be the AMATs, of course.
Yeah. Is there support from the commission?
Sure.
Any objection to that? Do you have enough language to go on, Mr. Davis?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thanks. 4E.
Well, I have one more
Go
comment
ahead.
on that before we stop. Is
Yeah.
I guess at the very beginning it just talked about the need to coordinate our the different plans. You know, AMATS has the bike peds and trails plan. Actually, maybe it's already part of the action plan is to combine those into a network plan. I guess I've just heard that. Is that still in the works? Is that an action item? I guess the second paragraph talked about the consistency between the AMATS bike plan, PED plan, and trails plan. They're three separate documents now. I understand that there's a move to combine them into a cohesive network plan, which I think would be helpful. And, you talked about all the different plans. It would be a couple fewer to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that maybe I'd heard that the planning department was moving that direction. Am I wrong?
Have you all heard anything about combining these plans into a network plan of some kind?
I have not, and what that doesn't mean it isn't happening. It may not be because I have my antenna up as well as they should.
Okay. Brian, any specific recommendation that you would have there? I mean, I think we generally...
It's a good it's a suggestion anyway. My source, I guess, is AMATS group, between Craig Lyon and Joni Woolham. They led me to believe that that's already in the works. So I think it'd be a great idea.
Well, we can follow up. We'll follow up on that and find out and let you know.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Any other issues on 4C? 4E. Trail connections within and between neighborhoods, community institutions, and commercial centers. Some suggested language from staff under Land Use Plan 6.1 and the description for community facilities and institutions. Mr. Spring.
Oh, yeah. I'm not really sure it's necessary. I'm not going to object to that. But, I mean, there's an adopted pedestrian plan, which is an element of the comprehensive plan. So it doesn't, this is a little redundant to me that it would say you should promote it because it's already part of the, and same with the bike plan is also an element of the comp plan. I don't understand the necessity for it. I don't see a harm, but I'm not sure why.
I'm all for reducing redundancy if you think it's redundant. So, but that would be your recommendation. It's up to you. I mean, and
the first one, the second one, I guess, pedestrian connectivity is provided to schools and community institutions in infill design principles to enhance connections and pedestrian access apply. Well, that I don't understand because I'm not sure what that means, but I guess that's a different issue, right?
start with number 1. Are you suggesting that would delete the staff recommendation under Land Use Plan 6.1?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone have issue with Mr. Spring's recommendation? So no objection to deletion of 6.1. I think what we're doing is the sense being that it's already accounted for, and this is a specific staff attempt to address a comment by adding more language. I mean, so I think the notion is that you feel the safe, it's already there. Okay. So hearing no objection, delete 6.1. The next bullet underneath 6.1, pedestrian connectivity is provided to schools and community institutions, and the infill design principles to enhance connections and pedestrian access apply. What's the infill design principles? Is that a thing?
I think that's on page 25. Let's see here. Page 25. In the first draft of the land use plan map, the community discussion draft, there was redundancy among the 15 or so of the land use designations. They were all saying the same thing over and over again. In the public hearing draft, we have collected those things into one place, and so statements like the infill design principles apply. We refer back to section 2.1, and that's our way of avoiding a lot of redundancy in the descriptions. Thank you.
And in your opinion, these infill design principles apply equally to all community facilities and institutions, regardless of where they're located in the bowl?
No, in the sense that to some degree you may have environments that have a far more connected grid and more complete streets. Some areas just have more of this, but in all areas we'd be wanting to improve connectivity. So even in a suburban environment, as a street like Edinburgh on south of Cars on Jewel Lake and Diamond, suburban street. As the city evolves and the streets rebuilt, we'd be seeking opportunities to improve the pedestrian environment even there. Thank you.
Any objection to keeping the bullet in as written? It's either a keep, delete, or amend. So any objection to keeping it as is? Hearing none, that stays. 4F, addendum, commuter rail, starting on page 77. Anyone wishing to pull this section? It's a 3-pager. Mr. Spring.
Oh, yeah, this is full. It's a 3-page, well, there's 2 parts to it.
Use your mic.
We're only dealing with 4F, addendum.
Oh, you're right. 4F, 2-pager, then we move on to 4F addendum. So,
I apologize. I can clarify something.
go ahead.
Okay, so 4F was discussed. There's nothing new in 4F. The commission discussed it and came to a no consensus split back in November. There's no new information there. It's been sitting there festering in green color for months. What staff is attempting to do is it's just this 1-pager on 79 to try and propose a resolution. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair. I appreciate the effort to try to resolve it. I think, I do, really do, but I'm not going to support this change. I just don't. I mean, I don't think we should be designating a commuter rail, and I'm not even sure it's a commuter rail. I don't know what we're talking about here. I thought commuter rail was from suburbs to town, like Matsu Borough to Ship Creek. I would be okay with that, having Ship Creek as a commuter rail station, because there's been some planning involved with that, and they did some studies on feasibility and ridership. They estimate the amount of ridership. There's some type of not a financial plan, but there's a financial cost associated with it. There's no plan to actually find the money or tell us where the money's going to come from, because it's going to be a lot of money to operate a commuter rail from the valley. The other section from Ship Creek to Diamond is just a pipe dream. I've seen no feasibility study there regarding it. There's been some the site design, like you said, at Diamond, but that's not the same as a feasibility. I don't know what the ridership's going to be. I don't know what the cost is going to be. I highly doubt that it's going to be feasible. In fact, we just had a guy come into town just last week from Calgary, Roland Stanley, apparently, and he told everybody, you don't have the density for a light rail. We just heard that, right? So why are we going ahead with this? I don't understand.
So let me just understand, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Strike, but your issue is we're altering our land use plan map to support something that is an unproven concept. That's your issue.
Thank you for
right?
clarifying. Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's okay. The alternative would be in the plan to sort of somehow look at it and then amend the plan based on some feasibility analysis. But to amend it, I think Mr. Spring's arguing, is premature. Mr. Strike.
I think this issue has morphed into something that it never began as. I believe this started as a comment from the railroad that they would like to see a rail commuter corridor designated for a rail corridor for commuters designated. And then this morphed into, well, we've got to identify stations. We've got to identify all these points. I think what the railroad was looking, and this is where I concur, they're looking for, we have transportation corridors, we have walkway, we've got all these different corridors. They're just asking, and I think rightly so, as designation, not creating new rail lines, but a designation to say, for in the future, we want to think about commuter rail area. And this has been on the discussion board for probably close to 20 to 25 years that I recall. This started with trying to create rail down to Girdwood. Then it was from Portage and Whittier and so forth, and Seward with the rail line for where we built a station out here at the airport. And then we talk about the northern side as to bringing in traffic from the north. And I think all we're looking for is a designation for a corridor. We're not funding it. We're not studying it necessarily. We're just identifying that this is something in the future. It's a possibility.
Yeah, I hear you, but we're altering. Danielle, help us out here.
I think this is just a question, so I'm not sure if it'll help us out. But when you say, Commissioner Strike, that you're looking for a designation, are you looking for something, a designation on a map? Or are you looking as far as like a designation as far as a definition in the plan somewhere that...
I don't think I'm looking for definition. I'm thinking, I'm trying to support the railroad here a little bit in their initial comments that it was, no offense, I think they want their own pixels. They want some of their own color pixels as a conversation starting point for future reference. And we tend to do it for roads, we're doing it for trails, we're doing it for any number of different corridors, but here is a topic that I don't think gets sidelined because it doesn't fit something that we think may be in place in 30 years, 25 years from now. It's a long-term range planning map that, we're not dedicating land, not dedicating resources, not dedicating dollars, but we're dedicating the topic for future discussions.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'll go to Tom in a second, but there's language that says the time frame for implementation of commuter rail transit service is uncertain.
Well,
that sounds like we're moving down the road to actually have commuter rail service when, in fact, we haven't even proven out that it's a viable option.
This whole topic has morphed, and it started with a conversation where there was nothing written before. It was written that the railroad would like to see a transportation corridor for rail transport. And then it's morphed into 4 pages of, no offense.
Words?
I'm not sure. Words. This thing has morphed into, I don't mind, if we got to move this thing forward and let's delete it, let's do it. But we morphed this thing into something I believe it never was intended to be when it became a comment, and we started discussing a comment because we discussed every comment that ever came before the committee, whether it made sense or not. And we've given a lot of comments more due than we ever should have. And that's why we're still here tonight.
Okay, I got Tom and John in the queue, so you guys fight it out and decide who goes first.
So through the chair, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. So my understanding is that, because I dealt with this way back when, and we did receive more than just a comment from the railroad. I mean, there were a variety of a spectrum of comments from the public, including some property owners, rail advocates, and the railroad. And as you alluded to, there is 25 years plus worth of preliminary feasibility studies, analysis. I've read all of that, or a lot of it. And you're right, it's very visionary. It's all over the place, in terms of the commuter rail segment between Matsu and Ship Creek, and then also the other segment that goes south to Girdwood. Will any of that ever come to pass between now and 25 years? We don't know, and that's why we have that language about the uncertainty, because there's a lot of big steps that have to be taken, as Mr. Spring alluded to. The financial package for that is huge. Putting the structure together to make that happen is going to need to go through the legislature. So we're trying to identify something that's visionary. We're trying to put it out there. Whether it needs to be as specific as it is on the map or in the documentation, I guess is a fair question. But we're trying to respond to the comments that we received.
And I believe the very first comment that came out was from the railroad asking for a designation for a commuter rail corridor. And then from that morphed other citizens, because there was no comments before their first comment. They generated that just as a designation. And then this morphed into, when it went out for more public, everyone's commenting on this. And then we're talking about feasibility studies. We're talking about the cost. We're talking about all these other elements. Well, we've gone way beyond, I think, where we should be on this topic. It's a long-range plan, and all I'm doing is I wanted to support the railroad, and they said, you know what, that's a good idea, for a designation as we move forward. And, it may not be feasible 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. We're not dedicating land. We're not setting aside land. We're not setting aside anything on this other than the possibility and the feasibility that there could be a commuter area here, which we were a hairbreadth away from developing that, and there was money set aside to build such a terminal there at the Diamond Center at one point. There was money set aside for that, to build it. And it was for a specific cause, but that went away. But is it going to be used as a commuter rail? I don't know.
So, okay, Tom, are you back in?
Just 2 points. First, to be clear, our proposal is to not show rail stations on the land use plan map, that they're within these areas that have already been designated either through the transit supportive corridors or the fact that they're downtown for essentially transit supportive development.
So they're transit supportive development for reasons other than rail. That is your point?
Yes, in most cases. Now, in the case of Diamond Center, it would indicate extending it northward to the Diamond Center from 92nd. But I think with that exception. The other point is that the conversation has been going on, and it's gone a long ways. The land use plans for Chugiak, Eagle River, Girdwood, and then some area-specific plans in the bowl already show these. It's possible that they're helpful to have, even though we're not about to get a commuter rail station in the Powder Ridge, Powder Reserve. Having that there on the map is a reminder to the planners, the reviewers, property owners, developers, that there is this long-term potential there. And when we are making decisions about what to put there, long-term investments, that be thought about and considered so that we don't necessarily preclude that area being used as a transit rail station. In Chugach Eagle River, there aren't a whole lot of opportunities, great station sites, and there's one just south of the Beaver Pond down in the Powder Ridge area that would work, and it's helpful to have that reminder in the long term. Back to forecasts. Right now, we're not forecasting much growth, but we can't predict the future.
Well, but doesn't it go way beyond growth? It also just goes with the feasibility. I mean, we're talking, again, we had a conversation before about heavy rail versus light rail versus whether you want to locate the types of high-density uses around what is currently heavy rail. I don't know. John, please help us move on one way or the other.
I'll try. I mean, like I said before, I think the first part of the recommendation's okay regarding the Matsu Borough and Anchorage, because there has been some actual study on that, and the railroad did a fairly good job of that. But there's nothing south of there. If you want to include, I don't understand how the international airport could be a commuter rail station with the fact that there's no trains going there now. I don't understand. It's just used to be a wedding site, and I don't know. I would go all the way down to sentence ending with centers and corridors, and keep that, and take out the rest of it.
Mr. Strike?
We've spent way too much time on this topic.
Okay.
Pull the whole thing, delete it.
Okay. Mr. Strike's proposal is to delete it. Is there any objection? If there's any objection at all, because we're in committee of the whole and we're not voting right now, we will keep it in there and we'll deal with it on deliberation. Is there any objection to deleting the language? I object to that. Okay. So
that's what we did last time, and it's here again tonight.
No, we needed consensus. We did not have consensus, so we're only working in consensus in the committee of the whole, right? That's all we're doing because we're not really voting, right? We didn't have a consensus. So you're saying keep it. Does anyone wish to keep some portion of the language? Any portion of the language? Otherwise, it stays in. Anyone?
It stays in.
Does anyone object to deleting all what both paragraphs that are not just the additions, the whole language? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying we've spent too much time on this topic. Yeah. Delete the whole thing.
I think what I would like is about one or two sentences somewhere that says at some point the municipality may decide to continue to look at feasibility for rail service, whether in the city or intra-city, and just make it simple and get rid of 4 paragraphs.
Which was proposed 4 meetings ago on this topic. That's all this ever was.
So here's your challenge to staff. Give us very, very simple language that keeps it on someone's radar some way, but does not somehow imply that we're ready to make land use decisions based on rail. Otherwise, our recommendation will be to get rid of it. It just comes across as a too far flung and too out there. Is that enough direction, Tom? You good with that? It's not, and by the way, it's not because any of us don't want this, right? It's because of kind of where we are.
Yes, that's enough. We can work with that.
Okay.
We'll bring it back. No.
Bring it back in as simple a form as we can, and it is sort of general just to keep it as a placeholder. So the rest of them are going to be a lot easier, folks. 4K. Only pull it if you want to pull it. 4K on page 83 and 84.
Should we be looking for feasibility studies on this one too?
Well, this one has a do we have a map associated with this that we should be looking at?
You know, it would be helpful if you look in your copy of the plan on page 49. The comment from DOT and others is regarding what's on that page, and the proposed changes are to the text and those maps.
So we've got, just as an aside, my note next to the column is, this is not good planning. I mean, we've got the DOT saying, what are you doing with this illustrative thing? We want it more concrete. You got Mountain View saying, no way, we don't want the route. And you got Fairview saying, make a decision already because we can't do anything until you have a decision. So you basically have three totally different issues or positions, right? Show it for sure, don't show it at all, we don't agree with it. This isn't the place to be dealing with the particular alignment. And your lack of ability to make a decision, us, everybody, is leading to a lack of investment. And all that being said,
Take a look at the recommendations, that language. Okay. What's wrong with that?
you good with it?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone, any objection to the recommended language? None. Thank you, Mr. Strike, for moving us along. 4N. I seriously, I wrote much ado about nothing. So is there any objection to this language? None. We're not pulling it. That means we're okay with the language in 4N. 5H, addendum. That's page 97. Anyone wishing to discuss? Otherwise, a no is a presumed acceptance of these added bullets. Mr. Strike.
The reference to household incomes on the recommendation, first bullet point.
Mm-hmm.
Appropriateness, applicability.
Well, you can't, by your land use decisions, discriminate, can you?
Mm-hmm.
Because income's not a protected class.
But you're assuming you know what the income is going to be for those people in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going into an area that, from a land use standpoint, I mean, you can do a building and you can do rentals based on, or sales of units. You're familiar with that piece. But
Yeah, I mean, the reverse of this is only doing large homes, large expensive homes as an explicit policy to ensure that you don't have lower income people living in a place, right? That was common practice years ago.
I would actually say that all housing might be too expensive for most incomes, and then you would be saying that places have to have subsidized housing in order to meet the affordability. That's where I see it going.
I'll take a specific recommendation and then we'll move it one way or the other.
with it.
Okay. Any objection to it staying in the way it is? Okay. Seeing none. What are we on? 5I revised. It's like a third tier in right there. And there's yellow here. What does the yellow mean? That's the revision part?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we had an opportunity to talk with the author of the report about the accessory dwelling units, Susan Feisen, and the part in yellow is the part that's new. There is an initiative and movement to attempt to make it, to remove unnecessary barriers and to promote the construction of accessory dwelling units. In light of those efforts, what we've done here is to attempt to clarify and improve our action item language. We have an action item 4-8. Regarding accessory dwelling units, we've attempted to enhance that and then add a new action item, which would be a parallel process by which, through information, public information and applicant assistance or guidance materials to help folks who want to build an accessory dwelling unit get through the review process more easily. And this has been a successful strategy in other communities I have a big opportunity to, through a relatively little amount of work, get a fair number of new housing units. Thank you.
Thank you. Any objection to staff's language? My one comment is on 4.8. It just seems weird where it says including accessory dwelling units and townhouses. But, okay. Any objection to that language? Okay. Looks good. Third column. It's always a big milestone when we move to a new column on our list. Help me find 8I in the packet. Getting close. 8I. Any issues related to 8I? Some small text edits. Any issues? 8I. Anyone wishing to pull 8I? Hearing none, we'll assume. Oh, you good? Well, you're taking it out of context, right? So you got to go to the document and see if it makes sense.
I see where it's going.
Any objection? No, moving 8I. 8J. This is where we get into the choice of the reinvestment areas. And I think it's really just staff's rationale as to why they came up with those reinvestment focus areas. Is that right, Mr. Davis? No change. It's just a recommendation of how you got there. Mr. Cecil.
Yes, through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. Any questions for staff, clarifications, disagreements with the RFAs? I guess we could have it now. We could have it later. You good? Everybody's good. All right. 8L, Infrastructure Asset Inventory Report. Who leads? And they've indicated we're just amending the okay, anyone have issues with that, with 8L? Hearing none. 8B, page 122. I mean, this is just sort of obvious, right? Right? Any objection? No objection on 8V. We're into 9B, design principle for transitions with, instead of going, at the recommendation of the UDC, instead of going from gradual decreases, so really specifying how that's to be done, new develops should provide a transition, so allowing it up to the designer to be flexible in that effort. 9B. Anyone wishing to talk about 9B? Mr. Cecil, you still in there? John, you still in there? No? Okay. No issue on 9B, which means we're okay with that language. 9C, which is underlined, neighborhood buffering, appropriate intensity of development adjacent to industrial uses related to airport and military facilities. I had a question on these. We're actually saying that we are going to go and target rezone in the areas identified as the airport interface compatible, or whatever they call them, the APZ1, APZ, whatever. We're actually going to do that. Are we clear on the map where those areas are and what we're trying to do there? We know who this affects?
Mr. Chairman, yes. For example, in Mountain View, there is a...
No, and I know, John, because I've done a lot of work in Mountain View, so I know it's there, but we're now saying we're going to rezone it. So are we communicating adequately our desire to implement this action step by showing it on a map? That's my issue.
Yes, the answer is yes. There is a land use map that we have prepared that identifies those areas.
A separate one, or it's just embedded into the land use plan?
It's embedded, it's one of the separate maps. The map folio set that we have identified and that talks about that, the APZ issue on the actions map as well.
So in those areas, we've indicated explicitly, so we're not going to put multifamily, but we're okay with single family.
Correct.
Okay, any issue with it? What does it mean if you own an existing multifamily development? You're in one of these areas. You're now rezoned no longer to multifamily, and you go in to rehab your investment.
Yes, there are ways to deal with that, and I think that one possibility, first of all, the plan doesn't get that specific with that land use plan map, and it's really attempting to moving forward, encourage development not to make matters worse, safety-wise. One possibility would be when we would get down into the weeds would be possibly allowing existing properties to renovate at their existing density, so that we aren't, it isn't backfiring, that we're, creating a policy that would actually encourage these properties to just sit there and deteriorate, collect rent without improving. So,
to be determined.
To be determined. Yeah.
So, and that would actually be consistent with federal policy, which basically allows you not to do new construction within these areas, but allows you to do rehab with federal funds, recognizing that it's an existing asset. So then you'd be consistent. Okay, any issues with 9C? Hearing none. Fourth column, people. We're getting there. 10J. Everyone good? Keeping going? Anyone need a break? We're good? 10J. Specific parcels. Any issue? We're talking about 6,000 square feet right here, right? That's an existing parking lot. Any issue with this recommendation? Everyone good with it? Understand what the action is? Is this one on the map?
Yes, Mr. Chair. This is on the first of the four issue response maps that you've received tonight.
Okay. Any issue with 10J? Seeing none. 10P. Page 138. It's a no recommendation. Anyone wishing to discuss 10P? Seeing none. 11. Well, no, I have 11A marked green, but the next one on the list is 11I. Are we supposed to deal with 11A, or is that just one of those ones that's languishing?
Yes, 11A is just languishing.
Can I ask on this one, did this land recently go through a rezoning?
Yes, it did.
And the rezoning was approved?
I believe so.
So the rezoning was approved. I don't think we made we did not recommend that it be, I think it failed here, but I think it went forward and was rezoned to commercial, that corner, right? Tim's here. Tim's saying yes. So at this point, I'm not sure what good it does to keep it in the land use plan map, but enlighten me on that rationale, given that it's a recent action. My point is, would people here like to revisit the split decision and see if we could put this one to bed? Danielle, you got a thought? You were on the prevailing side, as I recall, of the case before us.
And just for clarification, when it went, they appealed our decision and went up, and it is now commercial?
Yeah, it's not really an appeal, but they can go forward
Yeah.
regardless of our recommendation, and they, with the same application, and it was approved at the assembly level as commercial.
Yeah, I would say as far as I'm concerned, I initially thought this was better suited for the residential as
Right.
far as protecting the integrity of the community. But given that it's a commercial use now and it's going to be going forward, I don't see a point in sticking with a residential landmarker for this. And so I would be fine changing how I voted on it.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if we keep it in as a different land use, they'll have to come in and change the land use plan anyway, won't they? I don't know. Well, it's already fait accompli, so I'm good.
I think you can mark that one as agree with a commercial from the commission. Tom? Any other issues on that one, or any more discussion? That was 11A. So we moved through one that wasn't even on our list. 11I. Addendum. Page 150. I think this was an issue that Brandon Walker brought up. I thought rightly that it was a former commercial site converted to a, whatever it's called, public, a school site, whatever, a school administrative site, and yet we're showing it as community facility or institution. Privately owned, not owned by the school district, leased by the school district.
Shouldn't the privately owned property be designated commercial as part of the neighborhood center?
Well,
I thought it was a good point.
okay, so staff says no. You want to speak to why you're taking that position, Mr. Davis, or just let us kind of see where everybody is?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This building is no longer a commercial building in its use, and as we go there today and experience it, it has definitely been completely remodeled into the school district headquarters. If you go there, it's an administrative building. If you go inside, it's all administrative. There's no storefronts. The East Wing is a school. It's a tech school. It's a high school. I toured it with my son, and that is definitely also very much been the amount of investment there. So the existing building there and what we project to be there in the future will continue to be this school district headquarters. We are still following up with the school district as to what is the term, the length of the lease, and when we designated this in the East Anchorage District Plan, and this is the adopted designation in that land use plan map. This is just carrying that over. As our research at that time, the lease was beyond that plan's time horizon, as we recall. But we are still researching the lease again to get that information again. If this plan is adopted, there's no change in the land use designation from what's adopted today in the East Plan, and there's no change in the zoning. The zoning remains commercial. In the event the school district were to leave early or the lease were to end, the property owner would have all the rights and entitlements under the commercial zoning that's there today. So there's not an impact. We're trying to reflect the anticipated continued future use of institutional. Thank you.
Mr. Spring, then Mr. Strike. You're out, Mr. Strike.
Does this change the tax base for the property? That's a rhetorical question. And I believe the other piece was there's more than one building there, and that there is a building particular there to the site that is actually being used in a commercial sense.
The gas station?
I'm not sure. I just recall that as being part of the conversation. Which I lent the credence to the question here. You know, it's in private ownership. They developed it for a particular use. Yet we're going to say now because of that use, we're going to change its zoning?
No, we're not changing the zoning. It sounds like we're just calling in the land use what it is currently.
Designation?
No, absolutely not. We're keeping the existing zoning. This map does not affect the existing zoning.
Well, does that lend the owner of the property to maybe come forth and seek to readdress the zoning that may lower his tax base as a result of that zoning?
I don't believe so, but we can look into that.
If I were the owner, I would, and I got designated this, I said, hey, it's like a taking, hey, lower my taxes.
I don't believe so, but we can look into that.
I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that one. You know, this one, it is what it is. I don't have a strong feeling. Anyone object to staff's current recommendation, or you can propose to sort of go commercial? Well, no, so it's in the plan as community facility or institution. That's what it is. That's what it was in the East Anchorage District Plan. That's what it's proposed to be. So you can propose to add it as a commercial if you want.
And that's what I would do. I would propose leaving
All right.
it as commercial.
And anyone want to join Mr. Strike and create a commercial land use designation for the Anchorage School District headquarters and charter school?
When you phrase it that way, let's understand.
The old Bonavase Mall, however you want to do it. Just make a decision and we're moving on. Who Mr. Strike has a motion that would need consensus to show that as commercial rather than as community institution.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
You mentioned talking to the school district, but did anyone bother talking to the owners of the property? I would be more interested on what they had to say about it personally.
Yeah, we can contact JL as well. Been meaning to follow up with them on a couple items.
I assume JL should look at all of their properties and just give you a response. I mean, one would think you might just ask them one time, take a look at this plan as it relates to your properties.
We have reached out to them in that respect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyone joining Mr. Strike on reversing it? Any objection to calling this commercial? Hearing none, the commission would like it shown as commercial. You're welcome to move these things forward to the assembly, of course, and not agree with our recommendations. That's totally within your purview.
Just to be certain, this just to show it as neighborhood center.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the rationale, Mr. Davis, at least from my perspective, is a community use in a neighborhood center is not it should be allowed. It's fine. Right? I think what we're saying is it doesn't matter which one it is. It seems to be fine at that location. 11K, the fill site. Someone else, this came up with the parking issue. I think what happened, didn't Walker raise all these issues and then he's not even here?
Yes, Mr. Chair, no new information here except what's in yellow. From what we could tell, the parking lot, we didn't have any record of being authorized. It is an R3. Thank you.
Okay. We're not going to deal with it. 11, so moving on. 12C, addendum. St. Mary's Church, vacant land at southwest corner of Lake Otis and Tudor. Recommendation, change the land use designation on the southwest corner of Lake Otis and Tudor by extending the compact mixed-use residential westward over the entire Tract C, replacing other open space, bright green color. Any objection? Hearing none, good with that. 13J. Jewel Lake Town Center. Ooh, can't just say yes. Need to choose. Mr. Spring.
I choose A.
Okay. Tell me why you choose A.
Rezoning of the town center targeted area. Well, it currently is a town center designation, correct, Tom?
No, the West Anchorage District Plan demoted it from the Anchorage 2020 Town Center. We're recommending to re-promote it based on the findings of our housing and commercial lands studies. And you can consider option A a recommendation, even though it's coming off a little soft.
So that basically says it should be a town center then? That's what I thought, okay. And I agree. I think it's got a lot more potential than West Anchorage District Plan thought it does, and it doesn't really have that much effect, I don't think, overall.
Ms. Bailey.
I also think it should be designated as a town center.
Any objection to option A, town center? Hearing none, option A it is. Thank you. 13K, religious institution lands, designation to reflect housing potential. So there's a new action. Do you really just want to single out church properties? Or are you trying to indicate, whether there's excess land that the school district owns, or parts of commercial properties, or parts of utility properties, or anything like that? Is it really just church?
Mr. Chair, we would take that as a great suggestion to expand this from just religious institutions properties. We did start there, and there are other properties we'd be interested in exploring, but I think that would be a great suggestion to broaden that a little bit.
Okay, Mr. Strike.
Agreeing with the staff, and maybe that we characterize this with a new nomenclature, new name, that you can then encompass other types of property or ownership. But we are seeing a number of religious facilities, areas, developing their excess land specifically into residential. And the purpose of this, to paraphrase the staff, is to identify and increase the amount of residential land holding areas for development.
So we'll leave it to you, staff, to broaden it so it's not specific to one use, but basically what you're looking for is excess land holdings that may be appropriate for residential use in particular. Okay. Good with that one. That was, are we on to 14E? 14E. Can I just, my question, how is a horse ranch a community facility and not a commercial use?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the current zoning is PLI, and the facility is allowed under the PLI under the PLI zone, just as the neighboring abutting zoo is allowed. I think one or two of them may be allowed by conditional use, but they're permitted in that district. We certainly thought it was more appropriate than showing it as single, large lot, single family, which is lower intensity than its current use. Thank you.
Okay. Any objection to calling the Horse Ranch west of Alaska Zoo community facility?
Can I ask if we talk to the property owner?
You can make that recommendation. I think we went down this road once before, Andre, and that is that staffs at some point got to make the best use of their time moving forward. And, you know, I'm going to leave that one as pretty low on the importance list, but that'll be up to their judgment. 14F, congratulations. Last item. Requested hillside area amendments to the areas of growth and change map. Amend the growth and change map to change all of the moderate growth designated area near Potter Valley, including HLB, former Legacy Point, and GCI parcels, to little growth. Is that actually a land use designation? Little growth?
It's a designation on the page 19 areas of growth and change map, just showing areas of relative growth and change around the bowl.
Okay, any objection? Hearing none, we're good. All right. Could I get a motion to move out of the committee of the whole? Thank you, Mr. Strike. Seconded by Ms. Bailey. Objections? No objections. We're out of the committee of the whole. Let's get a motion on the floor. Could we get a motion to postpone land use plan map to next week? Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Seconded by Mr. Sporhase. Any objection? Hearing none, that item is postponed. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please? We're back to the consent agenda. See, that's what happens when I'm hanging out with the Ravens roosters. Okay. In front of us is consent agenda, section D. Just because I didn't state it previously, I do not have any conflicts with these items. Can I get a motion to approve? Thank you, Mr. Strike. Seconded, Ms. Bailey. Any items anyone wishing to pull of the two resolutions? Any objection to approving the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. Can we get a motion to adjourn, please? Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Seconded by Mr. Strike. Any objection? We are adjourned. Thank you.